Howdy y'all, I am Ice Gold, and yeah, we're doing, your name is Stone Block apparently, but today we are doing yet another 25 ice games, and that brings the total up to 75, and I did these against my better judgment, but, you know, we're alright. We came out of it fine enough. But basically, this, if you haven't seen the first two parts of the series, basically what I do is I play 25 games of max ice PvP, go figure, right? And I just document them all, I record them all, and I go over them in this video. And, you know, win or lose, whatever happens, I talk about those games because it really just showcases the true ice experience and the true experience of whatever school I'm doing this on. I've done 75 games for ice at this point, and then I've done 25 for fire and death as well. And I've got some more, I guess, planned, but we'll see if I decide to even, you know, do that much more PvP. But before I get too far into it, these are the stats. I am weaving Storm over here at Surge for, you know, a good strong counters, that type of deal. So I've got 175 damage. This is one shy of the cap of 176, but let's be real, that doesn't matter. So yeah, don't even worry about it. I've got 118 damage to Storm. This is well over Ice's dual school cap for Storm, but you'll see why I'm running it in a moment. I've got 83 resist. You could go to 85 if you have the plot armor robe, but I personally don't use that for a reason that I'll get into in a moment. For my accuracy, this actually would be a good reason to use the plot armor robe because I can base fizzle shads, lore spells, and gambits. It didn't happen in this video, but it can, and I'm happy that it didn't. But you can kind of tell what's going on here. I've got perfect accuracy to fire, so that way I can counter shields with things like Fire Elf. I can also trap counter with Immolate. It's pretty good. And then I've got 24 accuracy to ice, one shy of being totally perfect, but I do the exact same thing on my fire, so it's really no big deal. And then I've got 20 accuracy to storm, which is 10 short of having perfect accuracy for all of my overtime counters. But like with this, I didn't fizzle any of my counters in this video, but it has a much higher chance of happening. This is a 1 in 10 chance rather than a 1 in 100, so just keep that in mind. I do still think that this is the best setup for ice at the moment for PvP at max level. And just to talk briefly about the resist being 2 off the cap, you can get to 85 with the plot armor robe, but I am using the Hunhao's Comet Mail, as you can see there, second one down. And another benefit to using the Hunhao robe is you can have perfect accuracy to fire, and then you can get away with having this much accuracy to ice, but you do get one extra accuracy pin to storm, which is what I did, and that is very helpful. So that way, you know, you can have your 7 jewel, you can have your 6 from Sharp Shot on the pet, and then you can have 2 power pins for fire, and then you can have 1 more for storm, running a total of 3. That sounds right. I am... Okay, yeah. I was going to say, I'm going to go over the gear. Yeah, 3 is right, 3 is right, so... Yeah, and then crit rating, I crit fail all the time, even though I have 600 crit. I'm not even running any pieces that, you know, don't give crit that could, so... Yeah, I mean, you could see here, 600 crit rating, and I crit fail all the time. Block rating is actually pretty high, at about 800, and I've got 937 to balance. This is a swingier matchup, but if it was me right now, I would say put a blocking pin to Storm if you have one. I don't have one, and that's why you see this. But, you know, if I ever go against a balance, this can come in kind of clutch, so I rate it. For Pierce, I've got 47 to Ice and 45 to Storm. I use the Clockwork Courser mount, but I just don't have it on the Wizard right now. Too lazy. And 47 is the cap, by the way. So just to keep in mind, there is no off-school Pierce cap, which is, well, outside of your main schools. Like 47 is the highest you can get for Storm. But yeah, I get a lot more damage on the punishing pins that, you know, goes over and all that. But the excess punishing pins, they can contribute to this, which is why I run them over fire stuff. Just makes no sense to use fire stuff if you can increase your Storm Pierce, because your Zillas can actually hit for a lot these days. So that's pretty good. 39% pip conversion. It didn't really trigger nearly as much as I kind of thought it would. It's not something you should lean on, because anything below like 80% is very unreliable, and I mean, you've really got to be going for it. Like Hunhao Wand and like just P-Serve pieces just everywhere. So I don't do that with a setup, but I do still have roughly 40%, which has kicked in and has helped, but it's not something that you should rely on. Perfect pips, 1% over as a matter of fact, and 158 shads. This is why I use the Hunhao robe, because shads matter a lot, and as an ice you really need to gain on your opponent with things like Dark Surge and use the occasional Abominable Weaver, so that is always the play. And yeah, this is the deck that I ended the video with. I should probably run a few more of these, but oh well. But yeah, this is the deck that I ended off the video with. I've got 5 Elementals, 5 Golems, 5 Moons, 3 A-Bombs. Most of what you're doing is chipping your opponents with like low pip moves, low to mid pip moves like Ice Elemental, Volcanic Golem if you are going against somebody that you can shield against, which is rare, I will not lie to you. And then Winter Moon costs a couple more pips, but packs a massive punch. This is a very strong, just straight up hit, and I would highly, highly, highly recommend that y'all use it. Also in the deck, we have 6 defensive auras. We've got a brace here, we've got a brace from my amulet, and then 4 stabilizes because the devs decided that brace needed a buff, as well as another version. So that's why you see 6 defensive auras here. I could go even harder with that, but I'd just rather not get rid of some of this other stuff, because this is a new card that dropped with the Selenopolis update, and this is the only card of its kind. This is the only clear negative aura spell, and it is very punishing. The problem is the counters to this counter are better than this counter is right now, but against the right schools you can use this to perfection, and it's very, very strong. I mean, of course they've got to put a negative aura on you, but if they do, this is your answer to it, and it is very useful. So there's that. There's also attenuates. This is just a negative aura that just, you know, does what it says on the tin. An extra 20% incoming damage for 4 turns. That type of deal. Thieving Dragon. I really do wish I packed more of these, but not really sure where else I could really fit that in as opposed to all this other stuff. Because I've got the attenuates, you know, I've got the thievings. I've got 7, I guess, answers to an aura. And then here's this side. I am running these just in case, you know, you get somebody who's using traps, and that can be helpful. It's also a nice little shield breaker if somebody is using traps. So you have that going for you. And then I've got 4 Fire Elves. These can be a pain in the neck to pull from time to time, and you're going to see a lot of that in this video. But yeah, 4 Evil Snowmen. I've got 3 Sleet Storms, couple Empowers. I do pack 2 Leviathans inside, as well as 4 Tritons. These are very, very good. And then I pack 5 of each Tri-Shield, just to set up shield gamuts and whatnot. And then I've got 4 weaknesses. One thing that I do want to mention before I move on is I pack Ice Wyvern and Stormzilla, which means I have this fusion formula, which hits like a train, 840 storm damage, and then it'll dot clear for 30% ice traps, which the counters to this counter are better than the spell itself, but it can actually hit for quite a bit, and if your opponent doesn't have a set shield up, then it can actually be quite catastrophic, and it will make your opponent have to react, so it's a pretty good counter there. Yeah, I don't really think I've got much else to say on all that. I guess I'll go over the gear. The Jabalba Comet Helm, just very, very strong. You make up your pip chance elsewhere, and I'll show you how. And then for the robe, Hunhao, like I mentioned, It's very, very strong. You could run the plot armor robe for 2% more resist, but then you give up a lot of shads, so I personally wouldn't. You also give up a power pin, which I personally wouldn't, so there's that. Xibalba boots, which are quite nice. Just a staple for almost every school. And then for the wand, I've got the Xibalba wand, which is best in slots. I used this when I was running a P-Serve setup, but I am not running a P-Serve setup anymore. So, gives a lot of shads, you know, bit of extra accuracy, because I promise you'll need that. And it just gives a lot of damage and pierce, and that's very, very important. Next up, for the fame, I have the Icy Imperial Court Knife. This drops from Takanobu the Masterless out in the Cave of Solitude, a gold skeleton key boss, and I'm pretty sure there's an equivalent version that drops from Lambent Fire in the Crystal Caves of Avalon. So, there's that. And I've got the Dual School Pierce Jewels, which give a lot of Pierce to Ice and Storm. Very, very useful. You need rank 3 weaving to get those, but once you get it, it is very worth it. For the amulet, I've got the Chilling Archival Impul. This drops from the Forbidden Library Gauntlet, as well as the pack, and it's the same with the plot armor robe that I've mentioned a million times. But this is good because not only does it give you, 12 res, a lot of health, an extra square socket, so you don't, fall over and die quicker than a Death Wizard, but it also gives this extra brace, so you can run 6 braces and just sort of sit under them. And, if they counter you with like an attenuate or something, bada bing, bada boom. So that's kind of how Ices play. But, people just sort of ego this you anyway, and it's a whole thing. But for the ring, I've got the Skyfarer ring equivalent. This is the free version that drops from the Meow Yardy rematch, so definitely go get this for the pip chance. Without it, I would be well below, and yeah, I would lose stats elsewhere. So for the pet, I have got a double mighty sharp shot, and I really wish that 6% defy was brace defy, and that I had the sharp shot manifest, but no such luck, and there's a blind pet to mega video on this, so in case you're wondering how that's going. For the mount, like I mentioned, Clockwork Courser, just for that 2% extra pierce, that'll get you to your cap. And for the deck, I'm running the Icy Imperial Court deck. Could run, like, I don't know, Hoon Hao or something, if you really wanted to, but yeah, I mean, I personally, like, Hoon Hao will give you a little bit more HP, but I like this deck because it gives a bit of extra P-Serve, and it gives an extra Dark Surge, and that is a very important card. You saw I pack technically 5 of these with this item card, so there's that. I just yapped for almost 13 minutes, so I will definitely be timestamping these in the description, but without further ado, let us go ahead and get into game number 1. Game 51 was honestly a pretty good start. This match really just encapsulates what the meta is nowadays, which is endless aura and bubble wars, and I was really just lucky this guy wasn't on some set shield nonsense, because if he was, this might have been a loss. That is really how lopsided the fire matchup is for Ice. It's about 75 to 25 in favor of the fire, which means they can play bad and still win a lot of the time if they're using, set shields a lot. But either way, this was a nice win to start the video. We did see some counter the counters type play here, which really sets the tone for the rest of the video, but I was able to really pull ahead, and that's what gave me the dub here. In game 52, I went against another fire, and we are 2 games into this video, and we have already gotten our first set shield spamming mouth breather. Those of you who watched the first video in this series may remember this fella from game 14 when he almost lost, and it took me not critting twice for him to skate by the skin of his teeth. He took the eyes out of his name in the time since. Just as a side note, you can actually change your name once a year. They did change that, and I'm happy about that, but taking the eyes out of his name was aptly done, because he really could have played this match blindfolded and won with how his deck was set up. What y'all are watching is the guy doing exactly what he did back in game 14, just spamming set shields like it's nothing and countering the counters that I would use for his moves. Ice inherently struggles with things like shields because we can't just hit around them like fire can, and while I do run enough fire accuracy to handle that, I need to actually pull those elves while maintaining my storm pips to ensure I can Zilla when he throws out a cheat move where I have to spend more pips in order to react to it. A 4-pip Krampus versus a 5-pip Stormzilla, oftentimes 6 pips, since I don't run P-Serve to Storm. It's a lot of moving parts to this matchup, and I have to worry about so many more things compared to him, and his school is already supposed to beat mine by a safe margin. Absolute nightmare of a matchup. I said this was a Fire plus 50 matchup for a reason, with quite the expansion since the November tier list, despite the recent buffs to Ice. Just seriously wild in. When he realized I was on my game with my dot counters, he started stacking traps with spells like Emmet, since I can't counter both. This was before I was packing Immolates as well, and that was inevitably what broke through and got me killed. He played the lamest way he possibly could, making sure I could never even touch him, and then had the audacity to say that I was playing bad in the arena afterward, with all these boys to back him up, even though I had kept up very well with his torrents of dots and negors. I mean, I don't know why he's got an ego. He's a fire. I'm an ice. Do the math. I mean, seriously. And not to mention, like, set shields notwithstanding, you know. And I know what his deck is, too. He packs 8. So, I mean, look. I asked him why he was packing, you know, max golems, max sets, in, you know, quotation marks, because I didn't know that he was only packing 4 golems and 4 sets as opposed to 6 of each. And lightning bats, of all things, since no one packs that anymore, unless they're specifically setting for ice or death. Both are safe matchups for fire now. I just like to get that cleared up. And he and his Wizard101 gang just let it fly with everything a PvE player would expect from the PvP community. Gangs of Wiz is crazy work if you ask me, but there's been some crazy shit in our time, so it's really not too surprising. But with any luck, the recent reductions in the Storm v Fire matchup with Fire's expanded trap identity due to Amit's existence will get some of these individuals to stop packing, you know, 8 shields for ice. But it's me we're talking about, so there's probably no luck to be found at all. Game 53 was against another Fire. We are 3 for 3 getting Fires in this video. This game was more of a fight against my deck than anything, but that tends to be a constant against the Fire School, and we've already gotten 3 in a row. I can't use a lot of what I pack because they just feed off of it, and that really makes the matchup a lot harder. Respect to this guy for not spamming sets and only using 1 golem, but I bet if he used more of those, this game would have gone over like the last one where I could never even get a hit off on him because he always had a 70 set up, except this time I would have gotten my elo trained really hard, so glad to have taken the dub here for that reason. In game 54, I went against a Storm, so finally a break from all the fire, and I think it's kind of crazy how Ice gets mollywopped by our main hard counter in one of the worst matchups in the entire game, but then when we're the hard counter school, we struggle. Just because I won with more than 4,000 health left doesn't mean this was an easy fight. I was battling my deck for a good portion of this, and y'all might have seen the absolutely demonic starting hand, where I pulled both my braces and a stabilize in a matchup where those cards are extremely helpful. I really had to make sure I didn't get killed in one fell swoop towards the end, because Storm is very good at doing that, even against Ice, and the berries he used were definitely a roadblock as well. I kept a Triton in my hand for a while, and then the round I discarded it looking for something, he sent a berry, and I was like, bruh. So, that's sort of where things stand with this matchup. Ice is favored to win by a little bit, assuming both people play perfectly, but if he'd used more berries and gone for more trades when he would have won them, I probably would have lost since I was struggling to pull some of my more useful cards like Elemental. Another common occurrence from the looks of things are Storm Wizards using Fire Duel to get around shields, which means I also just can't use the main part of my identity that is meant to counter them, so funny how that works, I guess. For game 55, I guess this counts because I gained elo from it. I went against a death, quote-unquote, went against, and the guy didn't load in. So, I mean, Wiz really just needs to fix their servers. That's kind of all I got for this. Like, best chance you have right now is just switching to an empty realm before pressing go to arena, but even that can be faulty at times. In game 56, I went against another Storm, and this is kind of a run-of-the-mill type game. He wasn't incessantly spamming shield counters, so I was able to take the dub here. My personal highlight was definitely Wyvern that I got towards the end after he used the Hecate Strike, which gave him 3 Stormblades. That is always so satisfying. I mean, I feel like I never get to use Ice Wyvern because most of the schools that are blading have a bunch of trap counters that severely punish me. Like, you know, Lifes have things like Centaur and Rebirth to give them blades, and Fires obviously have Dragon, which creates massive pressure. Then there's people who carry Immolate. I mean, it's a hard knock life when you're on a school that sees a lot of your counters get countered right back because it pushes you into a corner. You'll see some of the Fires in this video freely use negative auras, because if I use Shu, like I was talking about in the beginning, that, you know, actually does put in the schwark against neg aura spammers, they'll just drag it off the traps and get a ton of damage from it, which is part of why they're so favored in that matchup, and force me to counter. Just how it is, I guess. Hard knock life on the Ice School. Game 57, I went against another Storm. Gold, gold, why are you quitting PvP soon? Gold, gold, isn't PvP so fun? Why are you quitting? I thought you loved PvP. Dude, if I have to go through one more match like this with some freakazoid who's hard set for me in a swing matchup and I'm deck failing, then it's gonna happen way sooner than I intended. This game has gotten me to set a rule for myself. No more queuing more than one game a session, because if I do, people have time to see that I'm on, and then Q-snipe me with cards like Max Set Shields, that new Arctic Zilla fusion for when I counter their set shields with Elf, and Evil Snowman pack for some reason. Counter the Counters is alive and well, and if you ever get someone who is this violently set for you and sniping you like you're a healthcare CEO who just denied their insurance claim, you are fucked. Plain and simple. Counter matchup be damned. This matchup is a toss-up, and she was playing like it's ice plus 50 and still almost lost. Like, dude, I packed 4 elves, and I even think that's excessive because who is really going to shield that many times? But then I get games like this, and I want to add even more elves to my deck. So far, I'm 5-2 in this video, which is a pretty good showing, to be honest, and while you could argue that I'd have lost game 52 just off of sheer school diff, this one would have easily gone to me had she not been as set as she was. Game 58, I went against yet another Storm, a lot of those queuing these days, and I won with a lot of HP. Like, this was my widest margin of victory in the entire video, unless you want to count the one where the guy didn't load in a few games back, but this was very refreshing after that last game. It was a pretty quick and easy match. It was very nice to get one like this in here. It was a nice reprieve from the horrors that were this video. Y'all haven't even seen half of it, and strap in, because the rest of this video is pretty goofy. Game 59 gave us our first tie in any of the 3 videos. And this whole game was a try not to get angry challenge. I mean, she was playing well, but I couldn't keep up because I was deck failing my shield counters the entire match. You'll see if you watch the whole thing, and all of these games are in a playlist, but we reached mythical levels of deck failery in this game. I already hate mirrors, especially ice mirrors, but even with all of that in mind, I was able to pull it back at the end when my deck finally started working. I mean, not that it really had a choice. All of my good cards were at the bottom, and I discarded a lot up to that point, so further deck RNG nonsense physically couldn't happen, and that's the only scenario in which I don't deck fail. Props to Laura for making the most of an annoying match, and of course, no ego or none, but I'm reasonably sure this would have been a win for me by a good margin if I had been able to pressure more effectively at the start, which means, you know, actually pulling my elves and not getting 3 frostbites in my last 2 hands. Like, that's insane. Her getting an early damage advantage on me was what brought it to a tie in the first place. I mean, I was sure I had no chance of going into the back half of the match because she had a health advantage of about 3,500 at some point in there, but I did manage it somehow. Her deck was really working and mine wasn't, is the main thing here. Her choice to Shrike at the end was a bit interesting, but it may have been the better play if she'd had a slightly stronger hit like a Lord of Winter. And I honestly wasn't even looking to tie it. I just sort of tunnel visioned since I'd finally pulled my other Weaver after looking for it for too long, and just sort of sat it hoping for a miracle. And what ended up happening though was, the snowman she used to break my shield on her first turn in Shrike ended up increasing her lash before decreasing it, so no matter what I did, the game was going to tie. Either way, I think ties should not cost anyone rank, and it's about time the devs did something about that. In game 60, I went against a Storm, and I think this was my biggest elo gain of the entire video. I gained 23 from this. So, do y'all remember game 57 and how set that person was? This person, fortunately, wasn't as bad about it as she was, which ultimately led to my victory, but this is the first person I have seen using golems as a Storm. That's not going to help you against fire, but it absolutely does help against ice. The problem is, very few ices queue, like even after the buff, so it's kind of just taking up deck space if you're not against an ice. Regardless, she used a few golems and a few set shields, but I was able to win this one, which was very fortunate. What kind of surprised me was that Thermic Golem actually does a lot of damage. Like, I was taking 2k to some of them, and if a Storm can keep Bubble like she did, as well as an Aura, then it can be a serious source of damage in this matchup. Still haven't changed my mind about it being a much twinnier matchup. I mean, if a Storm is on their defense game like this, then it can be very hard for an Ice to break through and win. In game 61, I went against yet another Storm. So earlier this year, Storm really rose up the school hierarchy without receiving a meaningful buff. The reason for this is they began to lean a hell of a lot more on cards that gave high reward for low risk, like Catch the Day for sudden death pressure, and Catalan as an offense-defense move. What was also helpful was the fact that Storm Owl is a Thanos snap of a hit, dealing 1450 to 1590 damage at max tier. So Storms put 2 and 2 together and started building pips, getting an aura, sending a catch, and then having a double buffed owl to do like 8k on an open shot to even tankier schools like Ice and Death. This didn't really help them too much in the Ice matchup though. They had plenty of tools like Barry, but their main formula wasn't going to work as great against schools that countered Blades and shielded a lot. So naturally, they decided to start using fire stats to eradicate any hope of shield schools being able to use their identity, and this contributed to Storm's massive surge in the meta. This is why this matchup was narrowed down when it was already narrow. I know on my tier list a couple weeks ago, I said Ice was favored by a little bit, but between not being able to use our identity and the fact that Storm really and truly can just shrike up and ignore our main stat, along with using the occasional set shield, the matchup has shifted enough in favor of Storm to where I think it's a toss-up. I'm getting games where Storms aren't healing at all, but they're still either winning or bringing it close because you cannot get below 5k even on an Ice, or you just lose. I think that's a big problem, but the devs are probably never going to fix it. The most they'll do is ban Storm Elf, which in my opinion isn't even that much of a problem and solves nothing because all they'll do is keep using Fire Elves, which allow them to keep their catch blades and inevitably make things worse. In game 62, I went against another Fire, lost, and you know how it goes. I mean, this really wasn't even much of a fight at all. I mean, I couldn't pull anything to save my life. Some Moons would have put in work, and I did get a good enough shoe off that he didn't counter, but he just did what Fires do now if they see you can counter their overtimes and stack traps. You can see me pull for Immolate in there, but I don't get it quick enough, and that's what costs me. And with 2 King Hearts doing the bulk of the damage, like, I just sort of fell over after that. And regardless, this matchup is damn near impossible anyway. I don't think I would have had a shot in hell even if my deck was working. Game 63 was a highlight. This game was a real test, because I queued a life. So, I was sure I'd lost when I queued into a matchup that favored my opponent in 45 more games out of 100 compared to me, but I stuck to my guns and did my damage. He absolutely lived up to his family name, using more hit and heals than I could count, and also managed to sneak in a Twaret when I didn't have a Triton up. He also used a number of set shields, which is certainly odd behavior to be sure, but I was able to get around him just fine. A major pitfall for life at the moment is the fact that some have started weaving Ice instead of Fire or Myth, and that helps me tremendously in this matchup because I can go for the combo I always tried to set up back in the last video, where I go for 2 back-to-back Lords of Winter for quick damage. I got off a pretty good Scion in the middle there, doing just shy of 5,000 damage, which gave me a major leg up, and after countering some of his heals, I was able to close out the match with the aforementioned double Lord combo, which did just under 6k between the both of them, since I had Bubble and Attenuate. I also had an Abominable Weaver ready for after the second Lord just in case I needed it, but fortunately did not, and the match really came together in a positive way at the end there. I had him immobilized, and all he could really do was spam heals that I would counter. The biggest kicker here was definitely the fact that I was able to keep Bubble. If he was deck failing his, that really set him back and allowed me to take control. 1 Sanctuary heal and it was probably Wraps, so I was very glad that I had been able to keep the Bubble for most of the back half of the match. If you do want to do Ice Peeve and don't heed my warnings about never getting into it for your own sake, one thing to always remember is that any match where we can actually use our identity being shields automatically becomes 10 times more conducive to an Ice victory. That's why you'll see me lose to Storms on occasion. They run cards that nuke shields, and if we don't have those, we'll always fall behind since we're nowhere near as strong with weaknesses of traps. Game 64 was a frustrating one. I went against this Storm, and he was aggressively set in a swing matchup using 4 Glacial Shields. I was deck failing horrendously. Not much else really needs to be said, except this was the game that convinced me beyond a shadow of a doubt that this matchup is a loss if your deck isn't giving you exactly what you need when you need it. Everyone tells me 1 shoe is all it takes to win, but what if they never neg you? What if they're carrying a 2-pip card that counters up to 4 of your shields? What if you literally can't do anything, and it becomes a punch-out, which will always go in favor of the Storm? If it's winning its main counter matchup and becoming one of 2 matchups to go that way, then the devs need to look into how strong some dual school combos are because Storm really has an advantage in that department. I guess it makes for good content though. Showing off school diffs like this will hopefully serve as a deterrent for anyone thinking PvP might be fun to do. Game 65, yep, same toxic guy as game 52, and take a guess as to what happened. Couldn't do shit, couldn't pull hits, and after this game, I added another elemental, another golem, and 2 more moons to my deck. Because if I can't ever hit the guy, even when he doesn't have a 70 set, which is never because he's a set shield spam and shit ahead, then I have literally 0 chance. Not much else to it than that, just another reason why this is the worst matchup of the entire game. Glacial Golem needs to be taken out of the game, no questions asked, because it's easily Fire's most overpowered card against Ice, and they really shouldn't have it due to their identity as a non-shield school. Game 66, I went against a Storm, and do you see how much this matchup actually works as the devs intended when Ice can actually use our identity? Storms don't just run Fire Elf to get around shields. They use it to ensure shield schools can't ever get off the ground against them to set anything up so they can turn the game into a punch-out, which they win every time. When a Storm doesn't obnoxiously use Fire Elves the whole game, then the matchup actually works like a real counter. Ice spells barely counter Storm, with the exception of Deathly Depths, but who's running that on reg. But Fire counters Ice so hard to where other schools can use 1 or 2 fire spells in their arsenal and swing the matchup violently in their direction. Game 67, I went against a Death, and in case there was ever any doubt as to how brutally insane Fire dual schooling is, people basically just, play their own school, do their thing, use all the things that make their school good, but they have all of what makes Fire overpowered against Ice, and I can't do shit. Y'all saw I wanted to go for a Lord of Winter play because that really accelerates the match if I'm able to Lord into a Moon, for example. But because he had the counter, I couldn't do that, and since I'd invested rounds into setting that up, it was all gone, and I lost the match from there. The counters are better than the setup, the counters will always be better than the setup, and that is why the game sucks. The devs will never fix that, and we exist in a meta where it's just, counter 101, which is about as far from fun as it gets. You can't be proactive and win, and that is why I'm quitting PvP at the end of the month. Ice is comfortably the worst school again, solely because it can't do much of anything without getting countered. And I mean, I had so much hope for it after this update, but there's really just none to be found. I mean, dual school expansion has caused such an uptick in people using Fire to just eradicate Ice, and I do not think Ice can climb the ladder until people stop using Fire Weave. Ice's offensive stats are notoriously ass, which is normal, but when every match devolves into a punch-out where we just trade hits, we're automatically at a disadvantage. The hope's gone. I'm just going to finish up this video. Game 68 against another Fire. And look, I mean, this wasn't my finest match, but a win's a win. And after this, I decided I needed to start packing a third A-bomb, since if I'd been able to find one for most of the match, it would have ended a lot quicker than 18.5 minutes in. And I really wanted to play for the Winter Moon for a lot of it, but just could never find an opening that also allowed me to counter any random overtimes he would decide to send. And he sure sent a couple, and I was just glad I had the Zillas in hand to deal with that, because otherwise I might have genuinely lost to a recruit. Like, sure, it's a counter matchup and all, but I still did not want to lose that. Game 69, nice. Well, at least this guy didn't do what he did last time and just abuse counters. He actually made some interesting plays with Hecate that I found neat, and since he's a Fire and I'm an Ice, he can do that without needing to worry about a shoe, because if I do send one of those, he'll just counter the counters and hit me back harder because the designers have done such a good job. Hooray! Real talk, I did rock with the Hecate plays, it's just there's already no counterplay in this matchup, and this was a little overkill. In Game 70, I went against the Death, and this was the Christmas video, and to be honest with y'all, it was quite the interesting game. Valerian here was able to set up a Doom Oni and really kept up the pressure with that, and he had me on the ropes, but since he wasn't countering my shields, I was able to win. Defense actually worked in this matchup, surprisingly, and it allowed me to take the dub at the end. Game 71, I saw I queued a Captain Fire, and the matchup, it was already decided. It's like I always say, these days the game is not about skill, the game is about who decided to play what school. 90% of matches in 2025 are decided the moment both players load into the arena, not when one person makes a particularly good move, and that is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. I do actually think this one might have been winnable if I'd had a Zilla on the turn I needed it most at the beginning, but ultimately, it's Fire versus Ice, and like I said, that's a 75 to 25 kind of thing. You really don't need to think in this matchup if you're the Fire, and I think that's common knowledge at this point. And, I mean, this is the 8th Fire that I've gone against in this video alone, and there's still more where that came from. Game 72 was against another Storm, and, yeah, this guy kind of just went AFK mid-match. Not quite sure exactly what happened, but I'll take it. And I did not show mercy since he was getting fire pips, and y'all already know how that goes by this point, so it still took me like another 8 minutes to kill him because Ice is that pitifully weak, but hey, I mean, a win's a win, and I'm happy I was able to recover some of the elo that I gotten drained after, 8 matches where I lose by the goofiest margin. Game 73 was against yet another Fire, and look, I mean, pretty solid games from these two matches, 72 and 73. I tried to take more of a punch-out route here, and it ended up paying off, so who knows, maybe I should have been doing this the whole time. But either way, I was reasonably sure I'd lost the moment I queued into the arena, and more so after his very first move was a set shield, so being able to come out of it with a win was quite a nice feeling. Game 74, third time, no surprises here. Should not have played more than one game on that session. And I did tremendously better in this one compared to the last two, and probably could have won if I had 1 to 2 more rounds, but still, I am no match for someone who packs 8 set shields to my school, which I have actually confirmed, even if it really is just meant for Storm. And I hope he's actually beating all the storms he's violently setting for, because it would be pretty sad if he could only beat Isis with the deck he's been running. I do honestly think that set shields should shield against the two schools as school counters, rather than just the other two in his triad, because even though Fire could still shield the Ice, they'd have to screw over a different school with much better shield breaking capabilities if they wanted to vigorously set for Storm. But that's just legacy spells, I guess. At least he didn't lightning bats me this time. That's character development if I've ever seen any. I do know that he still packs it, by the way, so, Game 75. The streak of winning the last game continues. I'd honestly been itching for this matchup since it's seen a lot of movement toward the Ice since the updates. This guy was doing his thing. He got a Jhin set up, which didn't scare me until he toughed a couple times and got me to about, 6.2k HP while having 2 buffs up. That did have me on edge, but he didn't go for a Jhin or a Yaga on rounds where I thought he should have, so I was able to win it. Most of my victory here came from playing around auras, and I was able to keep him from using them, and I was able to keep my own auras up, which helped. And he did eventually cave and use an attenuate on me toward the end, but I had kept a shoe in hand for a very long time, so I was able to hit him for a little bit and set up better follow-up hits, which set me ahead by quite a bit. Well, just for some closing thoughts, after the 50 games video, I said I was not going to do another video like this until Ice got a substantial buff, and that's what I thought happened with the Selenopolis update, and in a way, it did, because Ice is the only school that can severely punish negative auras, which everyone has been spamming lately. The 50s were sort of a honeymoon period in this video. I went 2-1 against Fires. I was doing well against Storm, except for that one, Giga setter. And I gained a lot of rank, and I was honestly excited to make this video. But then we got to the shitty 60s, and I was starting to lose to Storms. I got a few Fires who just did Fire Wizard things. I was even getting pressed by recruits just for my deck RNG being trash and simple school diff alone. But, I mean, look, I even lost to a Death who sat and played counter and didn't let me do anything. The highlight of those games was a match against a life of all schools, and look, I'll tell you this much, I'm fine with losing if it means I learned something. But there's nothing to really learn in a lot of these. It's like I've said, the matchup dictates who wins in a lot of scenarios. It's like, Ice versus Storm is much more swingy, but in a matchup like Ice versus Fire, that's very heavily favored for the Fire, like I've said before. And I don't learn anything from going against the same guy, 3 times, who spams set shields. I mean, the guy used 6 in our last encounter, and that was the one I did the best in. It's like, what could I have learned from that, except, just don't hope they don't set shield. I think that's what it boils down to, really, and it's disappointing, to be honest with you. It's like, sure, you can pack the counters, and I do pack the counters, but I have to get a whole different pip to use these, and then, if let's say I have, 8 pips on me, and I want to use Like I want to, you know, throw a Winter Moon combo, that type of deal, to do a lot of damage. And let's say that, you know, a fire wizard uses a glacial golem against me to break a shield that I have on and to, you know, put 70 sets on themselves. I could get a fire pip and use this card, but the problem is, from there, I can break that shield and then get my ice pip to throw my Winter Moon combo, but then he sends a Krampus, and I have to respond to that with a Stormzilla, and I still have the pips to do that, but I can't do the Winter Moon combo anymore. And, not to mention, if there are any existing glacial shields, like storm shields, that are still on him from, you know, the last time he golemed or set or something like that, this is going to do no damage. It's like Glacial Shield, just as a card, counters me specifically, because, and obviously I don't mean me specifically, but I mean this weaving combination specifically, and this is exactly what Ice needs, because otherwise, you know, we get totally folded by life without these, and it's a nice little blanket type thing, because this also helps us against life, this helps us against, you know, myth in some instances, and then this also helps us against fire. But fire, it's like, if these did real damage, and there was an actual punishment for fires using overtimes, then the matchup would swing significantly in favor of the ice. But there's not. And fires can just do this over and 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 be totally fine. The ice matchup is free rank for them. It's like I said, fire plus 50, they'll win 75 games out of 100 to ice's 25. Like, I mean, the 60s were a slog to get through, and they really made me realize that ice might actually be back at the bottom of the school hierarchy, because I was shown in like 8 of those 10 games that any and everyone can counter us at every turn and turn the match into a punch-out, which we'll lose if we don't have our braces and stabilizes. Then, sometimes, when we do, we still don't win, because the guy will Shrike and nullify it, or they'll just neg us and play you don't got it with Shoe. Then against Fire, which is about, you know, 40% of the queue anyway, I mean, I got 10 matches against Fire out of 25 in this video, which, I mean, that's crazy. But Fires can freely neg us, because if we counter, what happens? I mean, we get hit with a Fire Dragon that does, like, you know, 3 racks unbuffed, which also clears our traps, so we can't hit back nearly as well, while setting up a Scion and a full Ifrit conditional, all in one turn. And it also takes away our own leverage. So, it's like, a Fire can use a neg aura on an ice, get punished, and then punish the punishment, and win off of it, pretty much. And it's like, if a Fire puts a negative aura on you and you're an ice, the most you can hope for is pulling another one of these so you can just aura over it, because if you counter it, you're getting beamed. And you're taking so much extra damage that you just really shouldn't be if the designers did a good job, or if they did their jobs correctly. But, you know, what do I know, right? The 70s, brief as they were, went a little better, but was still marred by 2 Fires doing what Fires do best, which, of course, would be spamming set shields. Glacial Shield and Glacial Golem are my 2 biggest roadblocks, because if a Fire uses them, I have to find a way to hit around the Ice Shield, which, like I said, involves getting a Fire Pip and pulling an Elf, when I already need to be sitting on Storm Pips and cycling, or using a Frostbite, which just, you know, gets countered anyway. The other downside is the fact that even though I can actually do damage with my overtime counters now that Dual School Pierce Jewels are out, I'm still an Ice Weaving Storm, which, like I said, just gets blocked by the other half of the Glacial Shield, and that locks me out of another good source of damage against Fire. Like I said, there's no punishment for what they can do to me, but most of what I do, I counter their blades, I get punished severely. I counter their aura, and I get punished. I mean, not as severely, it's a King Art. Actually, no, I do get punished really severely, because some Fires like to pack Elf, and now they have an Ifrit set up for nothing, so I get punished severely for countering their aura. It's like, the only thing that I can do that can, well, it's not even really a counter. It's just a move that puts a weakness on them. But they'll usually just empower it off, or, you know, dark pact it off, which is a whole other thing. Because if they dark pact this off, then this is the play, and then they dragon, and then you have to really fumble around for these, which you're going to be hitting into a 70 set anyway, and they're going to do 300, 400 damage at tops. Like, brother, like what are we doing? What are we aiming at? But yeah, my fusion spell also sucks because even though it does a little more damage, they just counter the counters with a dragon. It's like I was saying earlier, you know, it's like, this is a very, very good dot clear. This is so good. It's really like one of the best fusion spells that they put out just at all. This is top 3 easy because it's such a strong overtime clear. And it's using cards that you already pack in main deck, so that's what makes it really, really worth. Like, this is a very, very good card. The problem is, you're heading into a set shield 90% of the time you use the card. So, what do? And then, when you do use it, it's like I was saying before with Ice Wyvern. They will counter the traps, they will counter the counters with a Fire Dragon, setting up, you know, like an Ifrit or a Scion, and then you're back at square one digging around for these, and, you know, you used 10 pips to counter their 7-pip move, and they're still doing 1500 damage to you with the 1 overtime that you couldn't get rid of. So, they just win that trade for nothing. Like, bro, I don't really know how else to really describe it. The matchup is so chalk, but yeah, I mean, it sucks, because even though it does a little more damage, they just counter the counters of the dragon, and like I said before, that's thousands of damage that I have to spend even more pips to counter. It's a vicious cycle in that matchup, and Glacial Shields and Golems are the reason why the matchup is Fire plus 50, or 75-25 favor in Fire, whatever you want to call it, rather than just Fire plus 10-ish, which is where I think the matchup would be if either both Glacial cards were banned, or if both of them only shielded to Ice and not Storm. Because then, why would Fires pack them? I should mention before I get too far into this, even though we're about 40 minutes deep right now, that Fires pack all of these Glacial cards because Storm is a bad matchup for them. Oh, this poor soul. He's getting shoe, but it's not even gonna matter if he's doing Dave. But yeah, I mean, the Glacial cards, like, they pack them for Storms, but they just happen to make the Ice matchup an automatic win, and that's why I think no one should be playing Ice right now, since there's so many Fires running around. Like, even though they're legacy cards, I think that if Glacial Golem's not going to be banned, they should at least make Fire's shield cards protect against Ice and Myth, rather than Ice and Storm, which, like, since Ice and Myth are the two schools that Fire is supposed to counter. So, I mean, surely that's not too crazy of logic, right? Naturally, Fire would shift over to using maybe Ice's shield cards instead if that change were to go through, which would protect against Storm and Death. And this would shift the whole set shield spam thing over to Death Wizards, but they weave Fire much better than Ice can, which would put them in a much better spot compared to Ice. Right now, Fire is Ice's biggest counter and our worst matchup. Not by far, since Life is right there, but a very bad matchup nonetheless, and that's solely because they can spam 70 shields that we cannot deal with nearly as effectively as anyone else. Then Storm is the other matchup that's sort of finicky lately, where 10 of my matches this video were against Fire, 9 were against Storm, so that'll show you what the queue is like. Those all should have been easy wins, but due to deck RNG, I actually lost a few of them because the matchup is much closer than any Storm Wizard would like to admit. I said the matchup leaned in favor of Ice on the last tier list, but I think we've reached true toss-up territory, if not moving it over to the Tilt Storm column. Berry spam is one thing, because it costs them 4 pips to use and us 6 pips to counter, if we're packing kill counters, by the way. Not to mention pulling the counters and having the pips for it. But the other thing is how Storms weaving Fire are able to turn this matchup into a punch-out. And Ice's main thing is shields. So while those are very helpful against Storms who aren't countering them, as seen in Game 66, most Storms are going to have the counters with their Fire Weave, and they're going to be doing a lot of damage with it. With that out there, Golem isn't reliable, Elemental Shield can't help you, nor can it set anything up long term, forget using Weaver for anything other than damage if you've got Elf dots on you, and Thieving Dragon is a nothing move for an Aura counter. Ice Elemental is honestly pretty good. And if a storm ever does neg aura you or use a Heckett or something along those lines, you can shoo and deal a bit of damage while applying like solid pressure, but storms understand that getting hit by a shoo is how ice wins this matchup, so they don't do it if they can avoid it. That'd all be fine if Shrike didn't exist, and you know, let me tell you, shriking into a catch into multiple Catalans is absolutely killer. Like even through a stave, and you need to have a Wyvern up to make sure those blades get countered. And if you don't have it, you're honestly pretty screwed, because Shrike eradicates the main stat that Ice uses to win this matchup, being Resist. And that's what I mean when I say Storm could turn the matchup into a Punch-Out and then win the Punch-Out. With Shrike as a factor, Storm can deal damage to Ice much quicker than Ice can deal damage to Storm. It's just for a few rounds, but sending a catch into 2 good big hits is a game ender, and I should have started packing Dispel as time went on, but wasn't really sure where to fit that into my deck. And, I mean, look, the Plot Armor Robe does give one for free, so, shoot, I mean, another reason to use it, right? Just to reiterate, deck RNG is everything in this matchup. If you don't have a defensive card on a turn where the Storm can hit you for a ton of damage, it's a good chance you just lose off of that because Wiz. When you get to the Punch-Out stage and you aren't pulling your Winter Moons or your Snowman, you are going to lose. Everyone says this matchup is safe for the Ice, but I don't think they understand just how much Storm can really do if the Storm is playing optimally, which, if they're weaving fire, that's pretty optimal. I came into this video with an open mind. Initially I was going to do 25 life games just so I could do one of these on a good school for once, but decided to take the Ice route instead and ended up regretting it heavily during the 60s. Though, I guess with all the storms in queue, maybe a video like that wouldn't be so great. Perhaps when Storm Elf is banned and the Storms are all downtrodden about losing a card that barely affected them anyway, so they don't queue as much, would be a good time to play Life, but we will see. But for now, that's going to wrap up. Thank y'all for watching. I've been Ice Gold. Be sure to like, subscribe, and leave like 50 comments for the algorithm. My Discord is down in the description if you want to chat with me some more, and I will see y'all later.